I just recently watched every single Star Wars film. I recently watched The Revenge of the Sith in theaters, and that got me interested in rewatching everything here. And I took notes for everything. And in terms of the criteria, we're going to be determining what are, at least in my opinion, I think good Star Wars films and like bad Star Wars films. I think most of these movies are like relatively similar in terms of quality. So I don't think there should be that much of a disparity. And I guess we'll start off with my least favorite Star Wars film and probably the worst one. This is a very subjective list, obviously, but I think I'm gonna go with like the obvious. I think everyone would agree with pick, which is that the Rise of Skywalker. Yeah, this movie is really horrible. As I was taking notes, I wrote like there's not really a lot to say. I would say this is my first rewatch of the movie since I watched it when it released back in 2019, and that makes a lot of sense because this movie was horrible to watch initially. I actually brought my family to watch this, and no one liked it. It was a pretty miserable experience, and I think there's it's almost kind of hard to like make fun of this movie since so many people have already done it. So I guess I'll just bring up certain points that maybe like others will not, and that this movie is like so bad that even like I think the only people I've spoken with who would actually defend this movie are either those who unhealthily hate the prequels to like a ridiculous extent, or people who unhealthily hate The Last Jedi to an unhealthily extent. And me personally, I think both of those groups of people are kind of irrational. I think first of all, I think the prequel films and The Last Jedi are both better than this movie. I think there's, and on top of that, I would say like the movie would have actually been like a lot better if it went under like the influence of The Last Jedi. I think I'm serious when I say this, and like a lot of people are gonna probably hate me when I say this, but I think the movie would be so much better if it followed the same direction as The Last Jedi. Because I think the problem I think this is another controversial opinion. I think The Last Jedi was a pretty good sequel to The Force Awakens, and that's mostly because The Force Awakens wasn't really a great film to begin with. But I do think that the movie The Last Jedi had some strong points to it, and I think this movie going down basically excuse me, in the opposite direction of The Last Jedi really ruined it in a lot of ways. And I think that that's like this. It was just it's a disaster because of that. Because now it just kind of like, it's trying to backtrack a lot of the mistakes made in The Last Jedi, and some of those mistakes I would even argue aren't even like that poor of mistakes. So that was just kind of a problem. And then I would also say that like the like a lot one of the only redeemable qualities of this movie is that it's so bad it has like some funny dialogue at times. Like you have like classic lines like "I'm the spy" or what else? I guess there's "I'm the spy" or somehow Palpatine returned, and I do think that's a good point. But like there, as you'll see later on with like especially the prequel films, there are so many movies that have like really like so bad they're good lines in the Star Wars franchise in general. So just because this movie has like one or two good lines doesn't really save it. And I think that kind of gets to a bigger point where some people like the movie because it's to them it's so bad it's good. I actually really disagree with that point. I think this movie is really honestly kind of boring. I think even within the Star Wars franchise, it wouldn't be like a good example of a so bad it's good film. We'll talk about it later, but I think Attack of the Clones has a lot more hilarious lines and overall like a lot stupider things going on. I think that movie's way better as a so bad it's good movie. And even then, I think Attack of the Clones is also a very boring film. So I completely disagree with the notion. I don't think the movie is really that entertaining. I don't think the movie is absurd enough to like to make up for like the really bland parts and bad parts of the movie. The movie isn't. I don't think it's as ridiculous as people say. I think it maybe if you're a nerd, the movie is like really fun if you watch it in like a so bad it's good way. But besides that, I disagree. And the next movie I'm going to talk about is the Clone Wars movie. I actually think there's a good argument for this movie being as bad or maybe even worse than The Last Skywalker. A lot of people in the community, especially older people, haven't even watched this movie. And let me just say, this is not a hidden gem. It's pretty bad. I think there are some solid moments. Like I like some of the action. You don't really get a sense of like tactics or battle tactics with the clones or the droids or whatever. But it's I guess it's like a little fun seeing them fight each other. I think Ahsoka's character in this movie isn't that great. To be realistic, her character really isn't. I think she's one of the more overrated characters in within the community. That's like a whole nother can of worms though. But within this movie, she's not really that interesting. She's not a bad character, I'll say. She's just not very well developed. They also change Anakin's character a lot in this movie because Anakin in this film is almost nothing like he is in Attack of the Clones, which a lot of people have already probably talked about. But I really don't really. I'm not a big fan of that inconsistency, and it kind of plagues also the Clone Wars show, sadly. And because I think the problem is that like a lot of people criticize how Anakin was in Attack of the Clones because he was like pretty psychopathic. So they try to change him to be more likable. But I think in doing so, they made his character in this movie and like the rest of the Clone Wars less consistent with the movies, which I think is kind of a problem. And then another thing I wrote down is this is one of those movies this movie I need to rewatch because the last time I watched it was like when I was 8 years old. And there's also like just in general, the movie has bafflingly terrible moments. Like there's the Jabba the Hutt's kid, which they basically resolve the conflict because this kid is sick and they need to heal him, and they basically just heal him out of nowhere. And then you also have characters like Count Dooku and Jabba the Hutt, which both of these characters suck in this movie, especially Jabba. Jabba's always portrayed in like Return of the Jedi as like a pretty intelligent character, and he's manipulated pretty easily in this movie. Overall, just very bad. And like the animation of the movie is also pretty ugly. This isn't like to the point like in the later season of the Clone Wars where it starts to look pretty good. And overall, like there's not a whole lot to say. I think this movie, in terms of plot, genuinely has problems similar to the Last Skywalker, but it's not. I don't know. I think the reason why I wouldn't put the Clone Wars as bad as the Rise of Skywalker is simply because like this movie, most people aren't gonna watch it. It's like not. I don't think it's as terrible because it's also not as connected to the other movies. You could just watch this on its own. I think this is a more offensive project compared to this, in that more people are gonna watch the Rise of Skywalker, and both of these movies are like in similar caliber, but just because one is like more warranted to watch, that kind of ruins it more. But anyways, moving on to the next film. This is actually, I think, my first controversial take, but I think The Force Awakens is pretty terrible. I think it's worse than The Last Jedi, which is a pretty unpopular opinion. I actually remember when this movie came out, and I remember watching it in theaters. It was very hype. And I remember while I was watching the movie, my soul almost was going away. It was, I don't know how to put it, but in the early 2010s, someone like me, in the early 2010s, I really liked Lego, and I was in between two Lego themes, being Bionicle and Lego Star Wars. And in the early 2010s, I started to prefer Lego Star Wars because Lego Bionicle had been canceled in 2010. So overall, I was like, and because of that, I was starting to become more of like a Star Wars fan. I started like getting more into that community. And after watching this movie, I'm not kidding. I think the movie, like, it's such a bizarre experience. I don't know how to describe it, but it's one of those movies where you know it's bad, but since everyone else liked it so much, you couldn't express your feelings, so you just kind of had to like do, I guess, like silent protests to the film. Because I don't know if people remember, but like when this movie came out, The Force Awakens, it was beloved. Everyone loved this film. It was like universally praised by everyone. And when I watched this film and I realized everyone liked it, I went back home, I saw the reviews. This was a time when I was like more into film reviews on YouTube, and I learned that everyone else on the internet liked it. I was like, okay, well, seems like this community has strayed away from what I like, and therefore I'm not going to support whatever this is. And I stopped liking Lego Star Wars. I didn't buy a single Lego Star Wars set after that until like 2025, which is pretty crazy. I didn't get back into Lego Star Wars for a long time. And it's crazy because even when Bionicle, and also like that was not just that, but also like Bionicle came back in 2015. So I was like, oh, maybe Lego Star Wars is something in the past. I can move on to this. But even when Bionicle was canceled, again, I still preferred that over this. And I remember when I watched the movie, I couldn't understand why I had such an adverse reaction, like such a horrible reaction. But like now that it's 2025 and we've seen like stuff like AI, I think I know how to describe this movie. It feels like an AI movie. I think that's a good description of the film, and I'll go into that later. But so far, I've been really negative. I think it's important to like mention some of the good things about the movie. I think in terms of like the good, I think it handles Han Solo's character pretty well. He's I think he has purpose in the story. He's not just there to be fan service, which is I think important because we'll talk about some other Disney Star Wars films, and I think this movie is a little bit more respectful in some ways, not always, to like fan service. And then you also have like there's also the mix of practical and CGI effects in this movie, which is new, and it's a good style. It's been used for a lot of years now. It's everyone likes it. I think it's okay. I think sometimes using practical effects can be a limit to something, like to making like a grander story or whatever. We'll talk about that when we get to the prequels. But overall, I think it fits this movie, and I think there are some, I guess, potentially good characters in like Finn and Kylo Ren. I wouldn't say they're great. They're like good characters, but they're interesting. I think they're good starts, especially Kylo Ren. He's the most liked character in the movie. And then I'll move on to talk about like the bad things about the movie. And I think one of the most misinformed things about this movie is that the writing of the movie is like all right or good. I think the writing of this movie is terrible. Like no joke. I think the problem is like the story is a copy of A New Hope, which, and that is also like I guess an issue because I think A New Hope is also a movie that's very overrated in terms of writing. And I think that's a big premise for why people think this movie is good. They're like, oh, it's like A New Hope, and A New Hope is very well written. But in reality, I think what made A New Hope, or like the original Star Wars movie, so special wasn't really the writing, it was the special effects. When you talk about like when you talk to film critics, a lot of them praise the film mostly because it was revolutionary for the time for its effects. The story was good, don't get me wrong. A New Hope had good elements to its story, but that I wouldn't say that was the shining mark of the movie. I think the movie still had flaws. For example, I think we'll talk about this later when we talk about A New Hope. But the movie's pacing is pretty slow compared to even movies towards its time, and even like blockbusters for its like during its time. And we'll talk about that later. But like it really does not translate good in The Force Awakens, because The Force Awakens is basically at that same pace, but the runtime is longer. So overall, the movie takes a way too long of time to like introduce certain topics. There's like that whole mercenary scene, or like when Han Solo is stopped by like these gangs. That entire part was terrible. Not like that. I don't know why they had to add that in the movie. And then like on top of that, I think moving on to the dialogue, I think the dialogue of this movie is also pretty terrible. It's very meta, and there's like a lot of references to other Star Wars films, the original Star Wars films. And I feel like if you were to show this movie to someone who never watched Star Wars before, they would almost be like, they would roll their eyes at those scenes. And even I, who actually do know those references, were like, oh, okay, yeah. And I think those scenes just make it dated. And then like, I think also like, aside from Finn and like Kylo Ren, some of the characters are kind of weak. Rey's not really an interesting character in this movie. Poe is not really an interesting character in this movie. Leia's barely there. It's like the characters are like surface level. They're not what I would call good, fantastic characters. And then you also have, I think another huge, massive issue, and one of the best things about A New Hope, is that the original Star Wars movie, in its writing, can be watched within a vacuum or within the context of the other Star Wars films. I think that is so important in the quality of the movie because you can literally watch it, not know anything about other Star Wars movies, and love it. And then you could also watch it, like knowing a lot of the Star Wars films, or like not knowing or whatever, and then you'd still like love the movie. Like you can watch it not knowing anything, and it'd be great. You could watch it knowing all the other stuff, and it would also be great. It's just a very malleable movie to watch. Compare that to the Force Awakens, which I think actually has the opposite issue. I think the movie is horrible to watch within a vacuum or within the context of the other films, in the way that within a vacuum, the movie is very referential. So, as I already mentioned, some of the dialogue is frustrating. And on top of that, it's not a complete story. Like, Finn is kind of like complete in some ways, but you have characters like Rey, where her arc basically ends. Like the beginning of her arc, when she becomes like starts to become like a more interesting character, is at the end of the movie. The movie literally ends on a cliffhanger, and in the middle of a scene. And then there's also moments like Snoke. Snoke is teased in this movie. Why is he teased in this movie? It really, like, the movie feels so incomplete. Like, you need to watch things after in order to get like a complete story. It's not like A New Hope where you would be satisfied with all the characters' development in the movie. And then on top of that, there's also another thing I would like to talk about. It's like the problem with, and then the movie also doesn't work within the context of the other films, because knowing that the Last Jedi comes after, and then the Last Skywalker, you know that the characters in this movie don't really have a solid conclusion. And then if you watch the originals before watching this movie, it almost feels exhausting. Like I watch the movies, and it always makes me angry when people are like, "Oh, Luke Skywalker is so bad in The Last Jedi because they just destroy his character so he could do the same thing again from Return of the Jedi." But this movie literally takes the exact same plot of like A New Hope and just does it again. And to me, that's so much worse. I think one of the worst scenes in the film that some people praise is like the Hitler speech scene, where the characters are like, or like when the First Order has like this evil speech and then kills like an entire galaxy's worth of people. That's bad, dude. Like that's like, it was so obvious they had to rise the stakes, and I got exhausted because you have no idea why they're like this or why they would even be strong still. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And I think moving on from the writing, I think one thing that this movie made me realize that I never really took appreciation for before is that another thing that I think what makes the movie feel so like AI and terrible is the mise-en-scene. Which is something not a lot of people talk about, but I think the mise-en-scene in this movie is terrible. It is not good. It's the props, they all look like just recolored things from the originals. There's also like the acting. I think some of the acting in the movie is kind of like, especially like Finn's acting. A lot of the characters in this movie, their acting feels like they're almost going along for like a Disney ride. It doesn't like, and as a result, due to that, a lot of the stakes are taken away from the movie, which is unfortunate because like Kylo Ren's acting, like he takes the movie seriously. He doesn't act like he's like in a ride or something. So it's kind of incongruent in terms of that way, and just like the way that everything is shot, the lighting and everything. It literally looks like you took A New Hope and you made it look like the other movies that came out during that time, like Jurassic World, Terminator Genesis, and it like that is so bad. It makes the movie seem so artificial and like not interesting to watch. Because even if there is depth there, it's so hard to like see what the movie's trying to tell you when it looks like everything else. It's like it doesn't feel like it has a strong message. The movie doesn't seem like you could like analyze it and take it apart. It's not a very fun movie to watch, in my opinion, because of that. And then also, another thing is that when people defend this movie, I don't think they make very good points as defending the movie. For example, like when you talk to a lot of people who like love this movie or like like it very strongly, a lot of them almost sound like people who first watched The Phantom Menace for the first time, where they're like, "Oh wow, the culture was so nice. Everyone wanted to watch the movie. It was so exciting to watch it." and then you're like, okay, that's great, but can you actually start talking about the movie? And then they're like, oh, okay, well, it's better than the prequels, which is like, that's a bad sign. Like, if you have to argue for your, first of all, it's not even true. Second of all, if your argument for why a movie is good is to say, oh, this other movie's bad, that just makes me think that your movie has nothing going for it. And I think that's one thing, a good description also for like why this movie is bad, is that it's not really bad in the same way these other two are. Like, these other two movies have major issues which ruin the stakes of the plot and everything. The Force Awakens is pretty tame compared to that. Like, the movie makes sense. The problem is that there's nothing there to keep the audience like wanting to watch more and like be interested. But yeah, I'm tired of talking about this movie. I guess I'll just move on to Han Solo. Um, this movie was actually originally I was gonna place it in the good tier. Actually, before rewatching it, I thought this movie was good. I didn't remember a lot of it from it, but like, I don't know. I didn't think of it was gonna like. I didn't remember a lot, but from what I did remember a long time ago, I don't remember hating the movie or like having an adverse reaction, like a sick reaction to it, like this one or this one. But wow, after rewatching it, it's like, it's hard, dude. It's hard, and I think it's like another issue is that like, this was the second last movie I watched before watching The Rise of Skywalker, and this movie feels like a blip. It's like nothing. In fact, the whole thing about like rewatching these movies, Han Solo is one of those I really wanted to rewatch because I didn't remember anything from it the first time around, and yeah, I feel like there's not a lot to say. I will say this: I think the story is better, the characters are more interesting compared to like The Force Awakens. It does feel like a movie with like its own enclosed plot. You can watch it in a vacuum, and also I do think this movie is better if watched in a vacuum, not knowing anything else. Because I think like another huge issue with the movie is that you can infer everything that happens in this movie to Han Solo. You can infer all of that just from watching A New Hope. I think it's so sad. It doesn't like add anything to the character. And then like on top of that, like Darth Maul being there is kind of dumb. Like it didn't, that wasn't hype at all, and that actively made the movie worse. It made the movie feel less like it was a finished story and made it like more annoying. And then I'll also say like I think the movie just overall looks ugly. I think the cameras they use are like digital, I'm not sure, but the cameras look very modern, like something you'd see in a normal movie, but everything is dark. It does not look good. Like I don't know how to describe it, but like they try to go for like a gritty looking movie, but with like really advanced, good looking cameras, so it just kind of looks awkward. I'm not a big fan of that, but like I want to move on. I'd say these four films are, I guess, like my least favorite. I think there is a gap between these four films and the next ones I'm going to talk about. And I'm going to talk about, I think the difference is that like these movies, they really struggle to have like anything going for them, not very interesting. Some of them are bad for different reasons. Like I think these movies are just like genuinely horrible, like this one and this one. Like they're, on like a traditional sense, really bad. And then these ones just more like have nothing going for them, kind of weak. Not very, like, it's easy to nitpick them because you get bored while watching them. The next ones I think are a lot more interesting, and that is, the next one I'm going to talk about are The Last Jedi, Phantom Menace, and Attack of the Clones. I think these three movies are like a decent gap ahead of the ones behind, but I still think they're really bad. Okay, yeah, they're still bad. I don't think The Last Jedi is a good movie. I still think it's a bad movie, but I think these movies are pretty even. And if I would have to like rank them, I would say that Last Jedi is the worst between these three, and then Attack of the Clones and Phantom Menace are pretty even. I think it depends on what kind of person you are. But moving on, I guess we'll talk about The Last Jedi. I think this is the most underrated film by like in the entire franchise by a lot. It's still bad though. I think it's way better than The Force Awakens. Like I can't even emphasize how much better it is. The movie looks better, like the cinematography of the movie is better. There's way more attention, I think, to how the movie is filmed. It feels like you could tell that Rian Johnson, just from the filmmaking, was trying to do something that was almost like the opposite of the originals, which is why people hate them so much. That's another thing that these three films here have in common, is that they all kind of go against the traditional Star Wars myth, or like at least what people think Star Wars was. Like when the Phantom Menace released, it was nothing like the originals. People hated it like crazy. And then the same thing with like The Last Jedi. When The Last Jedi released, it was controversial, and now it's like super hated now. But yeah, these movies, and I guess Attack of the Clones followed suit with this movie. But yeah, these movies kind of go against what people are expecting. And I think that's why they had so much backlash, because they weren't pandering pieces of garbage like this. But anyway, sticking with The Last Jedi, I think the writing is underrated in The Last Jedi. It's still bad. I think the themes are very strong. I think the movie is has strong themes, and because of that, I think it's more interesting and more investable because the movie's more interesting. It's the only sequel film I watched that I didn't go, wow, that's so horrible. Like when I watched The Rise of Skywalker, I was like, that's a really bad movie. When I watched The Force Awakens, in my conscience, I was like, that's a bad movie, but I didn't want to admit it because everyone else liked it and I didn't want to get crucified. So this movie it was like almost oppressive, but like I didn't like this movie. And then this one is the first movie where I watched it out of the sequels and I was like, wow, I couldn't tell if it was bad or not. And I think that is the reason why it's so much more interesting than the other ones. You could talk about it a lot more. And the characters are pretty good too. Like The Force Awakens, really the only characters there that are worth mentioning are Kylo Ren and Finn. In this movie, Rey is actually an interesting character. She's a lot more likable in the movie. Then you have Kylo Ren. Kylo Ren's character is way better in this movie than in The Force Awakens. Finn is controversial. I think, me personally, I think his character is like okay. Not some people hate him in this movie. I think that's kind of like what he's like. I guess he's the only one you could argue that he was better in the last one. And then Poe is also an actual character in this movie. He goes through an arc, which I like that. I think that was really cool. And then, but like moving on, I guess talk about the narrative had like major issues. I'm not kidding. I think like the Rey Kylo Ren stuff was the most interesting part of the movie. A lot of the other parts kind of sucked. And also like the way they handle Luke Skywalker's character, I think it's interesting because the movie kind of goes against, I don't know, it's like it's very hard because Luke in this movie is almost like a prequel era Jedi, which doesn't make a lot of sense because if you watch the originals plus the prequels, the whole story, like if you watch those movies, the prequels really recontextualize the originals in the way that Luke's story was almost not only avenging his father, but also avenging the Jedi Order. Because the Jedi Order was so problematic during the times of the prequels that Luke becoming a Jedi at the end of Empire is not only like a positive moment for him, but he also recontextualizes what is a Jedi, especially like looking at the definitions of what a Jedi is in these movies. But yeah, I feel like he goes through a little bit of character de-evolution, but it's kind of sad, but at least it's in the surface for the plot. This is a movie where obviously if you watch the other Star Wars movies, you're gonna hate it. It's gonna get a lot worse, but I still think the themes are good, and like I think it's not that bad for getting that or trying to think that Luke is a different character than he is. Like maybe you could think of him as like some Legends character or whatever, you know. You can make your own headcanon. And I think, and as a result, I think out of the sequel films, I think this one actually does serve a niche in that if you don't know the other Star Wars films, I think The Last Jedi is the best movie. Like, that's the best you should watch it because you don't know about a lot of the stuff in the other movies, and therefore the themes make more sense. But then at the same time, you don't really know what it's subverting. It's like kind of whatever. And it's also sad because like the themes in this movie and like the stuff this movie goes through and the characters don't really get paid off in the next one. It's just kind of an unfortunate film. But I do think that it's pretty good. It has more going for it. I think there's more attention to detail in the filmmaking and in the writing. However, I think it's kind of sad because it has like the same issue as like some of the other prequels, and that it goes against what people think of Star Wars. And because of that, it has gained like a really negative reputation. But I do see that as like I guess the Star Wars community matures in the future. I do see this movie rising, but for now I will put it below the other two prequels. And on top of that, I think like another reason why I think this movie is so good, or at least not well relative to the other ones, don't crucify me, is that I've watched like people defending The Last Jedi and people watching The Force Awakens, and I think just overall the people defending The Last Jedi are a lot more rational. When they defend this movie, they actually defend it on its own merits. They're talking about the story and how certain things like are the way they are. And there's actually moments in Star Wars critique, like talk about this movie, where there are things I didn't realize before. Like I think there is a point to a lot of people defending the movie that there's more than meets the eye, compared to this movie where it's like, oh, the prequels are so bad, they're so terrible, and this movie, see, it does the opposite of the prequels. When this movie does fan service, they actually do it good or whatever. It's like, okay, that's not gonna save your movie. The movie's so bad. At least this one has something going for it other than, oh, it's better than another film. But moving on to the other two prequels, these movies are horrible. I actually have vivid memories of watching Attack of the Clones because, as I said before, I was really into Lego Star Wars. And in 2013, they were releasing a lot of Attack of the Clones sets. And I got some of those sets, and I wanted to recreate the scenes in Attack of the Clones. So I got the movie from the library, and I watched it at home. And I'm not kidding you, the movie was so boring that I ended up playing outside while the movie was still running. And I went back indoors and I saw the movie still running. I was like, oh, I didn't even give a crap because the movie was so boring. Even as a kid. And this is when I was a kid. So, yeah, this movie's not good. I still think it's better than The Last Jedi because I think the movie does more with the themes it has. And I think the movie's more entertaining, just strictly. We're going to talk about this later, but, like, I think these movies are very even in the way that it depends what kind of person you are. For example, if you're a person who, like, cares more about lore and a story that relatively makes more sense than Attack of the Clones, Phantom Menace is your thing. I think if you're like also fine with like a movie that is really slow but at least has like certain moments that pay off, like the Duel of the Fates or like the pod racing scene, the Phantom Menace in that by that metric is better than Attack of the Clones because you're willing to go through that. And then Attack of the Clones is just absurd. Like the movie's like doesn't make sense a lot of the time. It's almost like dumb. It's like there's almost no stakes in the movie because everyone can just do things and you don't understand what the rules are. But the movie, in a way, sense of how it's absurd it is and like all the crazy dialogue in the movie, it's actually a pretty entertaining film if you turn your brain off. And I think for those reasons, I think both of these movies are better than The Last Jedi because The Last Jedi oftentimes has like narrative decisions that like make you frustrated. And and the movie is kind of tame. Like, I don't know how to describe it, but the movie doesn't have any moments that make you go, either make you think or either make you, like, laugh out loud. Compared to these movies. Like, this, like, Attack of the Clones can sometimes make you laugh because of how terrible it is. And then The Phantom Menace is just, if you pay attention, there are things in the movie where you're like, huh, that's actually not as bad as I was told from, like, Mr. Plinkett or whoever. And that's another thing, too. I think these movies, since they went against what the originals did when they were first released, they got criticized unfairly. And I think over time, more and more people have began to realize that a lot of those early criticisms of these movies are just kind of like fan critiques, kind of like what The Last Jedi is going through right now. But overall, I think these movies are pretty even. Very weird films. I would say the one thing that has these three in common is that they all have like really good moments in them, but they also have like really terrible moments in them that kind of make you like, just not like the movie. But anyways, I guess we'll move on into the good tier. And I think the one commonality with the movies up here is that you will always find a person in the real world who will say that this is their favorite Star Wars movie. I think this is every single movie I'm going to talk about from here on out has people say it's like their favorite. And the first movie I'm going to talk about is Return of the Jedi. And Return of the Jedi is, I think, a pretty good movie. It has issues, but I think overall, the overall piece of like the movie itself kind of outweighs those flaws. For example, you have things like Jabba the Hutt's or like Luke's plan for Jabba the Hutt at the beginning of the movie, which so many people have talked about doesn't make sense. And I think that's interesting because when you talk to people who like this movie, when you talk to people who love this movie, and they almost don't, they either don't care or they don't even realize that that's an issue. And the reason for that is because the movie actually gets you to care about what's happening, and you're so invested that you forget about a lot of the smaller things. And that's the thing. If you really want to be granular about it, all of these movies, even like the good ones, have moments where you're like, yeah, that doesn't really work, or like the it's like a little annoying or whatever. Like they're like, for example, in The Last Jedi, a guard doesn't have like a sword that could have killed Rey, or like I guess in this movie there's a kick. Luke Skywalker kicks like someone and they fall off, and but it's like an air kick. And I don't think those are the things in movies that make them horrible. Sure, it's best if the movie doesn't have those. I'm not saying that the movie should be filled with those kind of issues, but if the movie's investing enough, and like if you're invested enough in the movie, those issues kind of go away. And that's a great example with with Return of the Jedi, because most of the movie's actually not that great. Like Han Solo is kind of useless in this movie. Same thing with Leia; they're kind of in the background. The movie just becomes at this point Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader, and the Emperor in the movie, and those are the best scenes in the movie. However, and that sounds bad because you're like, oh, just those scenes are good, and there's like a whole movie attached to that. Why would I want to watch the whole movie? But those scenes are so good that they, no joke, like make everything else in the movie good, or like they're enough to make the whole experience worth it. Like, I'm not kidding you when I say this. Those scenes are so fantastic that you can make a good argument for why those scenes alone are better than some of the entire movies down here. Like, that's how much better I think they are. And even though this is like not exactly my favorite Star Wars film, I do see why people would think it's their favorite. And I do respect that opinion, even if it's like I don't see it personally. I do think it's a good movie. I think it's very entertaining. It's not the best though. I think for my money, I prefer Rogue One, which is barely better. I think the only reason why I prefer this one is because this one is a more consistent story. Like because Return of the Jedi, it's almost like the Luke scenes are the best ones, and Luke is not always there, so it's kind of like it's kind of hard to watch. But in Rogue One, I would say the movie doesn't pop off as hard as Return of the Jedi for most of it, but it does have. I think it's consistently all right. And this movie has had a huge resurgence in popularity. My professor actually told me this was their favorite Star Wars movie, which is interesting because when Rogue One first released, a lot of people said The Force Awakens was better than it. So yeah, times have really changed. I think a big reason why this movie has gone so popular over the years is because of things like Andor, and Andor has, because of how Andor is, and since Andor is so good, people are like, oh yeah, this movie then also must be good, which, yeah, that's not exactly correct. This movie is nowhere near as good as Andor, but it's still a good movie. I think I do respect it. The movie still has purpose. Like the mise seems really good. I think the characters of this movie are I would say like the greatest. But I'm shocked because when this movie first came out, one of the biggest criticisms of it was that the characters were like basically side chicks to Jen Erso and Andor. And I don't get that at all because, no offense, I actually thought the characters in this movie were more interesting than the ones in The Force Awakens. It wasn't until The Last Jedi where I thought The Force Awakens characters really got to shine. So that, and I think that's a pretty mute claim. Well, I mean, the characters are still not the greatest, but relative, at least speaking. And then, of course, I think there's also like a lot of fan service in the movie, which I didn't really like. I'm looking through my notes and trying to see like what I think, or like what I see in it. But I think it's not my favorite movie here, but it's pretty good. I think some of the characters are great. I think I like what they did with like Andor and Jen Erso. I like the villains. I think the movie is pretty. It's all right. It's not the greatest. I think me personally, for my money, I prefer. Uh, no, not Strikes. Empire Strikes Back. A New Hope. Sorry. But yeah, and we're getting to the point where like the movies are getting so good, where it's kind of hard to talk about them. They just kind of they're just entertaining to watch. They're entertaining to watch. It's kind of hard to explain why they're entertaining to watch, but like usually it's because they put attention, like the director put attention, like making the film and like the writing. And I think Star Wars: A New Hope. I love this movie, but I think it's the most overrated Star Wars film. I think it's still amazing. It's just this movie has kind of ruined Star Wars in some ways in that it created what people would consider Star Wars, like the myth of Star Wars, and as a result, you have a lot of movies which are hurt by this because you had like Empire, which released afterward, which had like a slightly negative reaction because it wasn't like A New Hope, and then you had things like the prequels, and then like Rogue One, Last Jedi, movies that didn't exactly fit the mold this movie set up, and they were shitted on because of that. It's like, okay, yeah, like not, they weren't treated well because this movie kind of set the standard. And I would say that the writing of this movie is pretty good. It succeeds. I think the movie still has some issues like with corny dialogue or whatever, but overall it like the movie still grabs your attention and is very good and like makes you forget about all those things. I think the pacing of the movie for a blockbuster is pretty slow. I like to compare it to like other movies in its time, and like I think of like Willy Wonka. That's not a blockbuster. It's a kids movie, but it's shocking to me how that's a kids movie and it's shorter, yet you get more out of it. And I found that movie to be a lot more entertaining than A New Hope. Same thing with Battle of Algiers, also a very different kind of film. But that movie is literally the exact same length, and you get so much more out of the Battle of Algiers compared to like this movie, where you get like some pretty strong characters, but like just a small story that you could probably tell it in like 10 minutes less than the actual runtime of the movie. And then you also have like Jaws, which I'm pretty sure Jaws is longer than this movie. But despite being longer, I think both movies feel similar in length. But like Jaws is slow because it's supposed to be like a thriller. It's supposed to have tension. So that's kind of strange how both movies feel kind of long, but one is a lot more purposeful in its length. I think what really makes Star Wars: A New Hope so incredible in film history is the effects. The effects were revolutionary for the time, and I think for that reason, it's so beloved in film criticism and like people watching these movies. However, I think for like in terms of writing, this is gonna be a controversial opinion. I think Revenge of the Sith is better. I watched this in theaters. I watched the re-release. I think this movie is amazing. I honestly couldn't believe it because I was scared rewatching this movie. I thought it was gonna not be as good. Like I thought it was maybe not gonna be that good. And the movie still has issues. We're gonna get into that. The movie does have issues, but it was better than I thought it was going to be, and I was already expecting it to like be a little, like already expecting it to be pretty good. And I think this is where I kind of need to like set up the premises for like why I think the movie's well written. In that, I don't think George Lucas is particularly a smart writer, but I do think that, I mean, I'm like a writing major at the college I go to, and I've read like a lot of William Faulkner, and that's an author that a lot of people are like, okay, he's a genius. He's a genius in his writing. There are entire like papers dedicated to like the dust and As I Lay Dying, like how like dust is portrayed in that book. And I've read a lot of the discourse surrounding his books, and I'm gonna be honest, I don't think he thoroughly thought of a lot of those things. Now that's not to say that William Faulkner isn't a genius. I still think William Faulkner is a genius. It's just that I think there were a lot of things in his books and like in his writing that might have been unintentional, but they still had meaning. I think that is what's important, is that sometimes you unintentionally make something that could be reinterpreted and is very interesting. I think that's exactly the case with Revenge of the Sith. There's a lot of things in this movie that people watch and they don't and they just take it at surface value, or don't like, they don't look into it. For example, a lot of people criticize the movie because they're like, oh, why are the Jedi acting so stupid? This is kind of like criticisms for all the prequels, but like, I think the problem is that a lot of people watch the movie as if the Jedi are like good no matter what. Like they're the because that's how they were portrayed in the originals. In the originals, they were unquestionably good. But you can't watch the prequels like that because the prequels don't portray the Jedi like that. If you watch these movies, the Jedi are pretty creepy and inconsistent in their logic. And as a result, like, and I think that's the problem. When you watch the prequels, a lot of people watch the prequels as if they have to have the exact same rules as the originals, when it doesn't really work like that. For example, when the Jedi talk about the Chosen One myth, a lot of people look at that and go, oh, that's a real thing. George Lucas believes it, so therefore, like that has to be a thing. And I don't like Chosen One myth stories. And since this is a Chosen One myth story, I don't like it. Which is, I think that's stupid because you're not really looking at it as if what the movie's doing with that idea of like chosen one, of like a chosen one. Because if you watch the prequels, you would find out that the movie, even though George Lucas thinks that this chosen one myth is real, the movies certainly don't portray it like that, ignoring all the other stuff. Like you have, like people talk about the chosen one myth, and it has like all these inconsistent descriptions about it. And no one mentions it in the original trilogies. And like Palpatine doesn't even believe in it, because if he were to believe in it, it would have just been easier to kill Anakin instead to have Anakin on his side. Because it would be a problem to have someone like that on your side who can destroy you at any moment, because his whole thing is destroying the Sith and bringing balance to the Force. And as a result, I think there's a lot of things in the movie that people assume, even though the movie might not exactly have a strong stance on it. Like, for example, Palpatine. A lot of people think, oh, Anakin was always a part of Palpatine's plan, which if you watch the movies, yeah, sure, there are some scenes that might imply that, but there's nothing in the movie that makes that clear, and I think that's what makes Palpatine's character so interesting. And I think the acting of the characters also really well, with Ian Chambers. No, what's his name? I don't know. But the actor for Palpatine, he does a really good job portraying like this mix of like a politician, especially like transitioning into what we know as the Emperor in Return of the Jedi. I think the acting in this movie is very underrated, especially with like Hayden Christensen and stuff. I think the dialogue is also underrated. I think a lot of it, again, connects to a lot of the themes portrayed in the movie, and it's hard to discuss this in depth because I'm like restricted to talk about like all the films in like an equal amount of length. But I do think that the movie, people do not just like look at it and they are like, oh, it should be like a blockbuster. It shouldn't have like a lot of meaning, when it does have a lot of meaning. But I guess moving on to like the issues I have with the movie, I'll say like the final fight is too long. The fight on Mustafar, like by the time they started jumping around on like those vine thingies, in the lava thing, like when they were on Mustafar, like they were like going around like monkeys with lightsabers. That was the point when like the tension kind of went away. And then I also think like the first act, there's a little bit too much. They spend a lot of time climbing up this ship to like see Count Dooku and Palpatine and all that stuff. And you could probably cut some of that in the movie. And there's also some things that were cut in the movie that didn't need to be cut. Like there was like a lot of like deleted scenes in the movie of like the politicians and like the start of the rebellion. And I think those scenes were important. Not only did they give more attention to characters like Padme, who could have had more material in this movie or like could have been shown more, but I think it also enhances a lot of the themes in the movie and shows how like, I guess, fascism rises in the context of the movies, which is something that like I guess a lot of people don't talk about, which is like a lot of people have issues with how the Jedi are so stupid in these movies. And I don't take issue with that, because if you try to think of like how like George Lucas was trying to portray these movies as like interpretations of like how fascist governments take control over history, you'd find out that the opposing force of fascism oftentimes does those stupidest decisions in trying to stop it, like with the Weimar Republic giving aid to like nationalist China when they could have, helped their own citizens. so that they wouldn't end up getting like fascist people into office. So because of that, I think in some ways the idiocy isn't that bad. It's just that since the Jedi are so wise in the originals, it kind of goes against that myth, which people hate so much. But or like, I guess goes against that myth that people love so much. But yeah, going back to that myth, where you need to talk about Empire, and I think and an Empire is my favorite Star Wars film. I guess there's not really a lot to say about it, but I think it's out of the original Star Wars films, it's the most balanced. The writing of this movie, for the most part, there's some bad dialogue moments, but like Empire overall has a much more interesting and expanded story than A New Hope. The characters are more interesting, everything's more fleshed out. And unlike Return of the Jedi, it's not just a Luke Skywalker show. Luke is interesting in the movie, but you also have Leia and Han, who actually are also interesting in the film. I think the movie has great storytelling. I love how the movie's filmed. You have you have so many scenes which kind of humanize certain characters like Darth Vader, and I love how how the movie subverts expectations and how it does it in like a good way as opposed to like The Last Jedi, where the movie actually builds up to the subversions, unlike The Last Jedi, where they just sometimes do something randomly just to get the audience like, oh, I didn't expect that. But like the movie, the Empire Strikes Back actually hints at the twist at the end of the movie. And sure, you could be stupid and be like, oh, well, I didn't see it coming. But if you watch the movie, there are hints to, Vader being Luke's father. And not only are there hints to that, but it makes sense. And not only does it make sense, but it actually leads to some of the best, that twist in that movie leads to some of the best content in like Return of the Jedi, or I guess some of the other Star Wars films. And that's why that twist feels so purposeful and strong compared to like the subversions in The Last Jedi. But like looking past that, the movie's just so well. It's like just so well made. I think a lot of people talk about it and they're like, oh, the movie's too dark. It should be like whimsy and fun adventure like A New Hope. And I disagree with that, because I think Empire is a pretty whimsical and fun adventure film like A New Hope. It just has more depth to it. Like if you watch the movie, there's tons of like goofy, fun moments that remind you of A New Hope. I guess just people don't like it when there's serious moments in a Star Wars movie, because A New Hope wasn't that serious. But I think overall this is my favorite Star Wars film. I've seen a lot of people call it their favorite. I think Revenge of the Sith I also really like, but the movie has issues. If you watch the movie, like there's too many issues to say that this one's better than the other one. I think A New Hope is an overrated film, which is why I think Revenge of the Sith is better, because I think the filmmaking is better. I think the cinematography is better. The movie has more of a style. The other aspects of the movie just are so strong compared to A New Hope, which is really just the special effects and the writing. There's some good cinematography moments and like some other good moments, but like the movie consistently this movie is worse than Revenge of the Sith. Then you have Rogue One, some bad moments, some good moments, but the good moments outweigh the bad, and the movie is just fun. I think the movie's interesting. I like the ending. The movie has a lot of like great fun action scenes. Just an entertaining film, entertaining action film, great Star Wars film, and it connects well to like stuff like Andor. Then you have Return of the Jedi, which is just the Emperor, Luke, Vader. All those scenes are fantastic. And then there's other parts which aren't as fantastic, but the movie still is entertaining as a whole. Phantom Menace has issues. Same thing with Attack of the Clones. Both are bad in similar ways, but for some reason suffer from different issues. I'm guessing with the Phantom Menace, people complain that the characters were kind of lifeless. So in this movie, George Lucas put a lot of life in the characters, but they're still inconsistent and kind of suck. And then you have The Last Jedi, which very underrated, has great moments, very entertaining movie, but overall it's kind of, the movie is hard to watch because the narrative isn't satisfying to watch. Then you have Solo, very boring film, but at least it's kind of interesting. Kind of wish Han Solo wasn't Han Solo. But I wish this was just a different movie. But it had good moments. I think it had good world building. The problem is that I think there needed to be more like character stuff, and the movie needed to have like a more concise ending. I think leaving it open with the Darth Maul scene kind of trash. Force Awakens, not good movie. I think it's super overrated. I think it's almost like what modern blockbusters would be in like a lot of stuff like the Minecraft movie or like a lot of like video game movies today where it's like, oh, the movie is good because it panders. And this is a perfect example of that, and I do not value movies that do that. And then these two very like obvious problems where you don't even have to be a film critic, you could just be an audience member and you can like pinpoint the issues in the movie. You're like, "Oh wow, I'm shocked that they made those decisions." But this one is more offensive because it was literally the end of the whole trilogy, and it destroyed the landing. Like it just did not. It was not good. But yeah, hope you guys like my list. I think overall, I think anyone could like any of these movies. It's like whatever. I think overall, I love Star Wars. Even the ones that people say are bad or have some interesting things to talk about. Like The Force Awakens, I ripped on this movie a lot, but I think culturally speaking, not talking about the movie itself, the movie has had an interesting effect on culture, how blockbusters would be in the future since the movie was so successful when it came out. So I think there's a great discussion. I encourage people to talk about all of these films, especially the ones which maybe not have had the most spotlight as of recently, maybe talking about Star Wars in a cultural aspect, not really in terms of like the story because there's not a lot to work with there. But just I like hearing the discourse. I love watching these videos. I think it's a great franchise, all of it, even the bad ones. So thank you for watching.